What is it like going global in one of the nations of Africa? What are some characteristics of schools and communities there? It is often the case that educators and families are intentional in choosing to live and work in an African country. How about you? Could you be a good fit for an international school in Africa? Thankfully, we have a veteran international educator and author who led a school in Africa and now consults with schools across the continent to answer these questions and many more. We sat down with Dr. Tim Stuart to draw on his past and current experiences. Check out the show notes to learn more about Tim's long and eventful international journey, beginning as an international student in Europe. We started the conversation with Tim sharing a couple of going global stories that gave us a sense of what can make international schools in Africa special. We then moved on to the guiding question of, what are some of your experiences as an international educator working and living in an African nation? Here are a few of Tim's responses. Many schools have themes that their community rallies around. Most of the schools have faced or need to face their colonial past. New leaders to schools need to come in with the mantra that they know nothing, whether it be with respect to managing the school or interacting with the local culture. Recruiting for schools like these often involves designing and then championing a vision of who you are as a school and community. African international schools are preparing for their future as the competition increases, with new schools continually being planned and built. This episode was recorded on August 29, 2023. We now give you the intriguing Dr. Tim Stuart.
Hi, Tim. Welcome to Educators Going Global. We are thrilled that you're here.
My pleasure.
And we usually start, just because it's a podcast about being all around the world. Tell us where you are, and maybe you can give us a little bit of how you recently got there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me. This is exciting. I just got back from a week retreat in Washington, D.C. with my colleagues at the Office of Overseas Schools with the State Department. And we met to kind of plan out our year and kind of look at where we're going to be traveling to. My region is Africa, so I support all the American/international schools in Africa. And so I'm now in Washington State, where we have a home here, and about to take off on my first trip of the fall. So this is kind of a regroup for the next week and a half, and then I head off starting with West Africa. So that's where I'm at and where I'm going.
My goodness, amazing. So much travel still in your life. It's great to hear.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sure you have a bunch, but could you please share with us a going global story from one of your experiences?
Yeah, I think I'll share maybe two short stories. One
Ooh, bonus.
bonus story, yeah. I guess the one story that I'll share is that at one point, it was the first Christmas concert when we were in Ethiopia, and we had arrived at the International Community School in Addis Ababa, and we were attending the first Christmas concert. Everybody's very exciting. And the music teacher had chosen a handful of soloists to participate in the concert, and this one student was pretty high functioning autistic, but autistic student with a variety of different needs, and she had been selected as a soloist. And about one line into her solo, she froze, completely froze, and was just not able to continue the song. And within seconds, one student went on stage, jumped on stage, and went next to her and started singing with her. And then, as soon as her colleague started singing with her, another friend joined and they jumped on stage. By the end of her solo, the entire seventh grade class was surrounding this student, and she was singing at the top of her lungs this amazing solo, and the entire group was singing with her. And it was a moment that she was in the spotlight unlike any other time. And I had come from pretty high powered schools in Asia at the time. This was my first stretch in Africa. And I just remember thinking, this is the kind of school I want to be at. I want to be at a school where we're about the individual child, giving children, whether they're perfect or not, giving them the spotlight, giving them the opportunity to sing and this camaraderie. So that was one story that just reaffirmed that we had made the right choice to go to Africa. My second story, the 10th grade kid, and I had been introducing kind of personalized learning experiences for students, and they were engaging in projects, et cetera, et cetera. And I walked up to this one 10th grade student and I said, so what are you working on? What do you want to solve? And he goes, well, Dr. Stewart, my community doesn't have any running water, but we have a river. And so I would like to create a water filtration system that takes river water and runs it through a series of filters, including eggshells, et cetera, and dirt and all of that kind of stuff to make it potable at the end of this process. And I want it to cost under $1. So he went on to try to solve this real life community problem that he had in his particular village, try to make it waterable. And I remember his presentation, and he ran the river water through the filtration system, et cetera, and it kind of came out. It was very dark and dirty, and it came out. It wasn't quite clear, and he was about to take a drink, and he says, "Yeah, no, not yet. It's not ready yet. It's a prototype." But that kid went on to go and study at Yale University and do amazing things, and not any smarter than any other kid in international schools, but having the opportunity to make a difference right there in their communities, giving them opportunities to do something quite remarkable right there. And it's like, wow, these smart kids are also super interesting and doing really, really powerful, life-changing work right here in school. So that was another affirmation that we had made the right move to go to Africa. Those are my two stories, and I'm sticking to them.
Oh my goodness. I love that. Talk about having, authentic learning experience that is above and beyond.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Wow, very impressive. So let's key in on your experiences in African nations and use the guiding question of really what are some of your experiences working and living in an African nation? So we'll break that into two parts. And let's start with working in an international school in Africa. What were some of your experiences there, and how were they distinct from working in other schools in other regions?
Yeah. I think it comes down to purpose in my mind, kind of the distinguishing factor of working in a place like Africa. You are surrounded by educators who are there for a reason. They are there intentionally there. It's not, you don't go to school in Africa just because that's where you got the job, or that's the highest paying job, or that's the job where you have the most street comforts, life comforts. Those kinds of things, as you know, are secondary to the fact that you are at that school as an educator. And this is whether you're a teacher, whether you're an administrator, or whether you're a parent, you are intentionally there. And so there's a bond that is created with the educators, the teachers at the school, and the community members. That's quite special because they're there for a reason. They want to be there, even though sometimes it can be a little bit harder in certain aspects of your life. Schools are not necessarily as well equipped, et cetera, et cetera. There's all kinds of reasons why people don't go or don't feel comfortable going to a place in Africa. But those who are there for a reason, and they want to serve and they want to invest in the kids that are there and make a difference in their lives. And that is something that you can't buy. You can't buy with money. You can't buy with great buildings. It's kind of this innate reason to be there.
So it's almost as though what I'm hearing you say is that teachers who go and teach in countries in Africa have self-selected already to have more of a mindset around what you were talking about before.
Yeah, they've self-selected. And again, there's a lot of reasons why they have self-selected this as a place. One of the reasons, interestingly enough, in our school in Ethiopia, there was a theme. Teachers who have children that they've adopted, possibly from Africa, and they want to be in a place where their kids are going to be experiencing a different type of, where they're going to feel welcomed and loved and find friends that look the same. And So there's a theme. There was a theme of adoption, parents who have adopted children. There was a theme of biracial families in our schools. People who had married individuals from a different ethnic group felt more comfortable. So, all kinds of reasons why they were self selecting. But whatever the reason, it was pretty magical when it all came together because they were there with intentionality.
Well, and just since I also taught an Addis, but 25 years before you did, I agree. Like it's a special place in and of itself.
Yeah.
We know that we should not think of Africa. People think of Africa almost as a country, but it is many different countries. It is so many different cultures. It is really quite a different experience, whether you're in East, West, North, or South Africa. But it's the continent overall is the kind of place where people do self select for a variety of reasons, like you said. And I love that whole adoption piece. I do know multiple people who have adopted kids from Ethiopia in particular. And I love that they self selected for the reason of feeling like more as though that was an experience they wanted for their kids. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
So, on the theme of Africa not being one country, some people say things like, once you teach in Africa, you're not going to want to leave. And of course, that is country by country, but there are some overriding characteristics that make it special in general. And some people would, sort of never would consider going to any country in Africa. And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on what you've experienced in that sense, since you now have really got a flavor for the whole continent, having been to all the different schools, of which, by the way, I'm totally envious of you being able to do that. But yeah,
Yeah.
tell us a bit more about your insights on that kind of idea.
Yeah, I think maybe the trap that people fall into, because there's no doubt that the schools, the international schools, international slash American type schools in Africa, have a colonial past.
Right.
There is something that these schools were established in so many, 60 years ago to support the Western non African affluent colonialists, right? I mean, if you just want to break it down, and that's a sin of the past that our schools have to address. And many schools have maintained a very non diverse teaching staff and kind of narrow, because that is actually what is seen as posh and elitist, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that's something that stands in the way of being the types of schools that we want to be in terms of diverse and inclusive and community schools. And so I think that those are things that, so for me, that one of the challenges was always this perception that we were part of that past, and just by the color of your skin, you tend to be lumped together with that. And you have to make peace with that because that is a cross that these schools have to bear and I believe have to intentionally work towards solving and breaking down some of these barriers that have been very, very deeply entrenched in some of these schools. So I think that, if there's anything for me that makes it uncomfortable for people to be there, is this kind of like you either run away from it or you address it head on.
Mhm.
And those who thrive in these schools are people that are able to address these things head on and say, no, this is institutionally racist. This is racism. If you
Yeah.
are telling, if the school's culture is saying you cannot have a fourth grade teacher who is African because that's not what we do, then that's a racist policy, and you have to address those things head on. And that's what makes to me the work incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding.
Faranj, Faranj,
Yes, Farange.
which means foreigner in Amharic. So I think
Yeah,
Tim would have
yeah,
experienced being called that. And you just stand out. That's just the way it is. And, I
yeah.
like what you're saying about address the elephant in the room, and
Mm,
I think the world would be a better place if people were more often able to have honest conversations about some of these things that are impediments to people feeling included and that are elitist, racist, whatever. And so I love that you are addressing
Mhm.
that. I like that idea of it's a way to grow, it's a way to make things better and to embrace diversity. It's better. It makes everybody better. I love it.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to make a connection. We're going to have a couple shows with Dr. Greg Mankata, who has just started the headship of a school in
Harari.
Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe. Yeah, that's where he is now, working hard.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I wonder what it's like going in as a potential head of school. You're being recruited, and you see the old ways are still
Mhm.
solid and they're not changing. And I wonder, how does one approach that and not giving up a part of your soul to say, okay, I'll just go with the flow. I'm going to get this job. I mean, that's got to be
Mhm.
really difficult. So maybe a side question is, without speaking to one specific school, are there some stories of change where new people have come in and changed the dynamic? And how does that happen?
Yeah, cultures are set and often entrenched in schools because this is the way you've been doing it forever. And there's reasons why it's been done that way forever. So a person coming in new to a leadership role, you have to understand, if you're coming into a school in Africa, you have to understand that you don't know anything. And everything you thought you knew as an educational leader, everything you thought you knew as a leader of people, you don't know anything. And that's for people like me who are, pretty confident and kind of just like, hey, I know people, I know children, I know schools, I can do this. You will be put on your heels more times than not at the beginning, particularly if you don't slow down and listen. Slow down, listen, get to know people before you start, swinging the axe. And I think that that's my best word of advice. And I'm a change guy, so I kind of go in hard and fast and want to change things to the way I believe that kids learn best, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't know anything, and you need to be a learner if you're going to be a leader in Africa. And so that's kind of my word. There are so many stories of people that burn out and flame out very, very quickly because they don't understand the cultural dynamics, even around topics that we see as just absolute no brainers, whether it's inclusion on the learning profile, whether it's HR work, union work. I mean, there's just so many landmines. You have to be a learner before you can be a leader in Africa.
And I love that because David mentioning Greg, it ties so nicely into his going global story. You'll have to give it a listen, Tim. He talks
Mhm.
about snakes and one of his early days as an admin in South Africa and how he dealt with that. And he
Yeah,
wishes he could have
yeah,
done it differently, but
yeah.
That reminds me, when I was in grad school for instructional technology a long, long time ago, our main book was all about innovation, where the professor had gone into all the research on nonprofits and going into many times third world countries and try to bring about change, and just how again and again they were falling flat on their faces, that they weren't starting with the connecting to the power base, the people that were the knowledgeable people, that you weren't showing respect. There are just so many things that need to come into
Yeah,
play in that process. So thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
yeah. It became so important to, I'll give you one quick story or a series of concepts. Coming from Asia, I was used to schools that had vision statements that were kind of like, we are going to be the best school in the world kind of vision statement. And there are plenty of those kinds of schools in various parts of the world, but it's kind of world domination, right? It's just like, you are the best, you are the best school in the world. And then there are some schools that had kind of moved away from that and they were like, no, being the best in the world is not necessarily what we aspire to, but we want to be the best school for the world, right? And so they moved their vision statements
ooh,
to being more best for type of language. And you see that in their documents and in their ethos. But even if you break that down, you break the for the world down, it's still very patriarchal. It's colonial. It's I have, therefore I have a responsibility to give. I've been blessed, so therefore I need to give you because you don't have
White
enough, and
savior.
et cetera, et
Yeah.
cetera. It's a savior kind of, so it moves the dial, but it doesn't move it quite as much as it, and so we kind of started playing with this notion of being our best. It's not I am the best. It's our best. It's a collective best. And it's with Africa and our world, right? So we changed our vision statement to be our best with Africa and our world. So it was a with, not an in, not a
Right.
for, but a with. And it kind of symbolized where we wanted to be. It was aspirational to say, no, we don't have all the answers. We don't aspire to be better than you. We don't aspire to be your providers. We aspire to learn alongside of you and to make mistakes and to grow into better people in our community, which includes Africa and our international community. So that's just an example of kind of how there are schools in Africa that are really wrestling with that concept. And it's super exciting to be a part of schools that are kind of getting that shift.
I love it.
Well, speaking of shifting, let's shift a little bit more to living in an African nation. Again, we've got to be so careful not to generalize here, but what are some characteristics and, let's say, cultural norms of living that you've experienced, like when you were in Ethiopia?
I think my best advice for people is you have to be willing to have your heart broken. And it will be if you are really going to be with a community. And if you just want to be the best school in that country, okay, that's probably happened 60 years ago. Like, so that's not a vision. If you just want to be a for school, but if you want to be if you want to be a with individual, if you want to live in place, you want to know people, that takes time and that takes risk. You have to take risk, and your heart will be broken and you will make mistakes. But I tell you, the rewards of being able to experience community, I have more friends, literally friends, which, as a head of school, friends is not a word that we use very often. But I have developed friendships with individuals in places in Africa, unlike any other place I've ever lived. And it's vulnerable and it's risky and it's all kinds of things, but it is absolutely worth it. And then once you do that, once you allow your heart to be broken and kind of go in and just say, you know what, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to do it really poorly. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, but I want to invest in this relationship and I want to get to know you and your family and your people, et cetera, et cetera. The rewards are so rich. So that's my recommendation for people. You have to be willing to kind of take risks. It's like learning another language, right? But culture is its own language in Africa. It's its own thing that you kind of have to say, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to immerse myself and I'm going to do this.
So that gets to our whole belief in having a growth mindset and also not putting up big barriers around yourself to protect yourself. As you're saying, open yourself up. Do you have an example or two, if you don't mind sharing, when you had the opportunity to say, hey, just like you were saying earlier, I just don't know a whole lot about this situation. Help me. What can I do?
Again, I go back to like one of my first weeks in Ethiopia, and one of my Ethiopian teachers had invited me to lunch on a Sunday. And being a new head of school, Sunday was a work day. I was like, I'm full on. I'm working in the morning, I'm working in the afternoon, I'm working, working, working. And I'd come from Singapore where work was just kind of, what we did. And I'm like, I'm happy to come to your house and meet your family, but I only have 2 hours. Like I've got a 2 hour window. No problem, no problem. Come, it's just lunch, just lunch. Well, it was about 4.5 hours in when the food had just kept coming and coming, and the relatives and the drinks and the this and the that. I mean, it was just this feast that I was literally on my phone texting appointments that I had already booked for the after. Sorry, maybe I'll be there in an hour. I'll be, trying to, manage my calendar. Not happening. It was just this force of family loving and food. It was just unbelievable. And then when my colleague said, "Would you like some coffee?" In my
Oh,
Western
no.
paradigm, I'm thinking this is kind of the end. Okay, I'm like, yes, yes, coffee, a nice little quick espresso would be like perfect, you know. And so all of a sudden they bring out the green beans, and they are roasting them. And, I mean, the aroma is coming out, and then they're grinding them by hand. And then it was an hour and a half process, just the coffee ceremony. So what I was thinking
Yeah.
was the end. To them, it was just the beginning.
Yeah.
And it was just like, I, I couldn't even wrap my head around what I had just experienced. And I grew up in France, so I know long meals. I can do that, but you understand the rhythm, and you can kind of. But here, it was one of those things where I got caught so off guard, and I realized I had just made a complete fool of myself by thinking that I was actually going to be able to get out of there in less than 6 hours, and so I failed. I failed.
But it's also so wonderful, isn't it? The
Yeah.
whole coffee ceremony and the whole eating. It's such a
Yeah.
shared
Yeah,
experience
and
there.
then
I
and then
loved
when
it.
they start, grabbing food with their hands and putting it in your mouth, as a sign of respect,
Yeah,
and you're just like, uh, okay, here we go, here we go.
fantastic. Yep.
Yeah,
Embrace.
so it's all good.
Do you have any more stories about Ethiopia you'd like to share, or shall we move on to?
Well, I think what I just enjoyed about Ethiopia, and I also say maybe Africa in general, is each one of the countries in Africa has a unique art culture. And when I say art, I mean paintings and carvings and clothing and music. And it just is, they're so different and so rich that it is just one of those things that it's a part of it's so deeply embedded in the culture that you can't escape it. It's everywhere. And so to me, that's, as I've traveled now to dozens of countries in Africa, the beauty that surrounds you all of the time is really quite breathtaking. And then you end up on a Thursday night in Eswatini at the Velvet Monkey Bar, and it happens to be karaoke
Oh,
night.
no.
And so you're in these random places and going, Eswatini, where in the world is Eswatini? Where am I? And how come are we singing karaoke at at the Velvet Monkey in Eswatini,
Oh, I
which
love it.
used to be Swaziland? And so, highly recommended if you're ever in Eswatini, please stop by the
The
Velvet
velvet
Monkey on
monkey.
Thursday nights. It's a fantastic, fantastic
Oh,
experience.
yeah, we have a lot of African artwork from our
Yeah,
travels and things, and Mark still wears his outfits from Gabon, Senegal, Ethiopia. So, yeah, I'm
yeah,
with you there.
yeah, for sure, for
So
sure.
maybe you can talk a little bit more about traveling around other African nations. Do you have any stories to
Mhm,
share
mhm.
about those experiences?
So I worked for 8 years in Switzerland. I grew up in Germany, France, Germany, and I worked 8 years in Switzerland. So I could literally, I mean, you can rely, time is a real precise concept in most places in Europe. And you also just have to get used to the fact that time is very, very relative to the point where I get invited to a lot of weddings and funerals and things of that nature. And you have to decide again, like, can I actually make it? Do I have time? And you're in our Western mind, like, do I have time for this? And then you realize that it's not about how much time that you sat there in silence in respect for the father who has passed away, but it's the fact that you did show up
Mhm.
that matters.
Mhm.
And the fact that time is a very fluid thing in Africa, for the most part. And the fact that you do show up is what matters. And you just have to remind yourself, like, if you're saying, I just don't have time to, yes, you do have time. And you don't have to spend a lot of time, but you have time. And it's the fact that you did show up that matters to your community. And I think that that was freeing. It ended up being a freeing concept as opposed to something
Mhm.
that was an overbearing concept. And I think that's a common theme in Africa is this connection between kind of our European American concept of time and in Africa, a very, very different concept of time.
What do you prioritize, right, with your time? You've reminded me that in Ethiopia, and tell me if this is still true, do they still have foreigner time and Ethiopian time, right? So it's the day
Absolutely.
starts at what we would call 6 a.m. and then what they
Yeah.
call 6 o'clock. That means noon in our parlance.
Yeah.
And so you really
Yeah.
have to make sure if you're getting together
Yeah.
with an Ethiopian person that you are we talking about
Yeah.
foreigner time or local? Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
Two different clocks all the time.
Yeah.
And you do have to clarify what time are we actually talking about. And then the calendar is different too, right? So
Hmm.
you're 7 years younger. That's the way I saw
Love
it.
it.
You're 7 years younger in Ethiopia. It's like, wow, it's actually 2014. Like, you know.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So yeah. So
very
yeah, all kinds of interesting things living in Africa.
mhm,
But I do think, that, if I get back to as an educator in Africa, what I have found, and I think it would be unfair for me to say all the things that I've said and not to say this, because there's so much intentionality. These schools, I don't know if this will be understood the way I mean it to be understood, but these schools punch above their weight when it comes to teacher recruitment, when it comes to attracting really amazing educators, because they are there not for the salary, not for the creature comforts. They are there because they want to be there. And so, whether you're talking about administrators, whether you're talking about teachers, your colleagues are going to be world class that you're connecting to. And you wouldn't think that when you go into a school and there's only 300 kids, K-12, you kind of have this concept of teachers that are just okay, they could only get a job in Africa. I think that's kind of the reputation in some ways. That's just not what I saw. I have seen really, really dedicated people that could teach anywhere in the world, and they've chosen to be here for some reason, and for whatever reason that is. And often it's because it's a place where you can actually make a difference. It's unencumbered by a lot of the things that some of our European schools are encumbered, the labor unions and all these kinds of restrictions that you have in places like Europe and all over the world, where teachers, you can't ask, you can't go above and beyond because it's even contractual, you're not allowed to. And here you have teachers that are like, no, I'm here and I'm going to go above and beyond. I'm going to, because I want to be here. I want to invest in this community. I want to invest in these kids. And it's a different feeling. And I think that creates a law of attraction for administrators that are just world-class administrators and world-class teachers that are investing in these really, really remote places when you
yeah.
when you're thinking about it. And it creates a magic. There's a magic about it. Highly recommended.
And we want to talk more about that recruiting process. And you remind me of a couple of my posts that could have been seen as hardship posts. And I remember just being dazzled by the people I work with. And just as you're saying, they wanted to live in that part of the world. They wanted challenge. They also were true travelers. They were not kind of the tourist. Nothing wrong with being a tourist. We've got a blog post up about it, but being a traveler who really wants to get in and immerse themselves in that local culture and see what happens. So let's move into the recruiting process and putting on your head of school hat. What does that look like when you were like in Ethiopia, for example? What are some factors that you take into play?
Yeah, I mean, if I speak from a head of school perspective, I think it's about creating a vision, helping to create a vision that is greater than you or even the school or the location. It's kind of saying we are a school that is on the move. We have a vision and we are recruiting people that are going to help us get there. And I think the heads of school that can kind of create that energy around where the school is going and the types of people that we're looking for that is going to help us get there. And that can be all kinds of things. That can be whether that's academic excellence or whether it's really right fit community. We want good people. We're hiring people. We're looking for people that really have a servant heart and that who want to make a difference and invest in communities and roll up their sleeves. Whatever that thing is, that you can create a law of attraction that's actually quite strong in Africa that overcomes the fact that you might not get butter every day in the supermarket. You might not have cream, and when there is, you'll get a WhatsApp notice. There's cream.
Exactly.
Everybody rushes to the supermarket, because there's cream on that day. So yeah, there's those things, and you may need to have a generator, and you need to have jerry cans full of diesel to run your generator because electricity is going to be out half the day. So there's all those kinds of things. But if a head of school and a leadership team can create that vision of where you're going, where you're at, where you're going, and who you need to reach, what kind of team you're trying to put together to meet that vision, it's a very powerful thing. And it's very different. I have seen that very differently than other schools around the world where they may tend to think that they're already there, like we're there. We've reached academic utopia. So come and join us on our lazy boy, and we're going to work hard, but we've already reached utopia. So come enjoy the fruits of the laborers ahead of you. And that's a different type of attraction than, no, we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going somewhere and we need people like you to help us reach that. That's very, very empowering and inspirational.
And how do you help nudge people along a little bit? I remember when we went to Riyadh, that was not on our radar whatsoever, but the line was short. So we got in the line and started talking, and we started going, yeah, this place could fit where we are in our lifespan, in our professional career. So, how do you take that vision and making thinking visible? How do you make it visible, whether it be at a recruiting fair or your video conferencing, to help bring along some people who don't know yet that they really would fit well and it would be a great environment to come to a school like there in Ethiopia, for example?
Yeah. I think that's done in a lot of different ways. I have been one, just my personal approach to this was to really encourage my school leaders, my leadership team, my teachers to be contributing to the conversation globally. And that's much like what you're doing here. You're contributing to the conversation globally. And to me, that is the single best way for people to notice what is actually going on. Join a community on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Go and speak and present at regional conferences. Join online conferences and represent the exciting things that you're doing in your school. All of those things matter. I write books. And so to me, it was about grabbing the people that are experts in whatever area and saying, I'm going to publish a book, but why don't you write a chapter on this? You're an expert in that particular field. You write that chapter. Let your name be on that book. Let your name be recognized, associated with our school, obviously, but get your name out there and get the great work that we're doing in our school out there, and people will notice. And that also creates this energy around, wow, I want to go and work in a place like that where people are publishing, where people are presenting. Create a PD budget and a PD philosophy that supports people going out there and presenting and writing and workshopping or whatever. So I think there's some really specific things that you can do to create that kind of energy way before you actually show up to a job fair. That there are people that are looking for you because they have been following your fourth grade teacher on Twitter for the last 3 years because that person has real interesting strategies when it comes to differentiation and RTI, right? I mean, that's what you want.
I love that. You reminded me of one of the reasons I wanted to go teach at Nido de Aguila in Chile was the staff did this spirit video and it was just looked like so much fun. I said, I want to go work with those people,
Yeah.
So that's another
Yeah,
aspect of that. Yeah.
absolutely.
Love it.
Absolutely.
So if you look at, again, we're trying carefully not to classify Africa as all being the same, but if you look at Africa from a 30,000-foot view, because you've had the privilege of being in all these different kinds of schools all over it, are there some trends that maybe you're seeing? For example, one trend that David and I are interested in is the idea that there have been an increasing number of for-profit schools versus not-for-profit schools worldwide. And so, any other trends of that nature that you see more broadly?
I think that that trend is coming in Africa. It's not quite the same as Asia, 20 years ago, but it's there. And schools need to really pay attention to the fact that at some point it's inevitable that a conglomeration of for profit entities is going to come. They're going to buy up land. They're going to create a glossy campus somewhere and they're going to steal market share from your schools. And so, if the time is now for schools to take that seriously, to upgrade their facilities. If they are the old and tired school, when that other school shows up, they're done. And I think that that's a message that many of our school leaders need to hear in Africa. It's certainly a message that I'm preaching as I go around traveling from school to school and country to country. So it's not there yet, but it is coming. And I think it is the right time to take action on that. I do think, obviously, some of the cultural, and I'll try to speak a little bit in code here so that I don't get myself into too much trouble. But I think some of the trends that we are seeing in other parts of the world when it comes to inclusion and equity and diversity, they are starting to percolate in places in Africa, and there is a cultural resistance to that in many places. And so schools that are kind of planting flags, no pun intended or pun intended, are planting flags in a certain area of inclusion are going to be countercultural, very, very much so. And that's something where school leaders need a lot of wisdom. They need to really keep the safety of their teachers and their children in mind as they create support groups and clubs and wave the flag, particularly in some countries. And I think that that's something that there needs to be a lot of attention to and caution, because obviously that can go south very, very quickly.
Yeah, it sounds a bit similar to what you were saying about you don't know anything. And so you're seeing this, as an outsider, but not to go in and say, well, we need to fix this and you're doing it wrong and things like that, but to listen, to open your mind, to try to learn and again, probably fall flat on your face a few times. But
Yeah.
yeah, I hear what you're saying that there are some things that maybe, we can work with people
Yeah.
and work to resolve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my takeaways, and I really appreciate the depth of coverage that you're offering here, is complexity and perspective, which we always talk about in life, and also self knowledge to the point that you don't have knowledge, as you're saying. There's a lot going on here. And it seems to me that schools, whether in this part of the world or facing similar circumstances, need to find ways to connect with one another clearly and learn from each other and say, we learned this lesson here, maybe it will help you. And then, of course, that they're connecting to the State Department for the US. And then for the French schools, the German schools, the British schools, hopefully they're doing the same thing to help different schools with their knowledge base and plan for the future. But back to what you're saying, it isn't like they have all the knowledge coming in as the white savior, but they can help connect and build that shared knowledge for sure. So I just rethought of the name of the book. It's called Diffusion of Innovation. So I'll put it in the show notes, but it's a book all about that process of helping go through change and move to the next place in whatever the entity's kind of lifespan is. So, moving on a little bit, you've covered a lot. Is there anything else you want to speak to?
Yeah, I think this has not been said. We kind of danced around this issue, but I think these next couple of decades are going to be incredibly exciting times in Africa. And I think that being a part of that movement, that energy for teachers is going to be really, really exciting. And it's complex and it's all kinds of things. There's some volatility to it, and we're seeing that in many, many countries as we speak. But these are exciting times. And those of us who were in Asia a couple decades ago, and we remember some of that exciting energy that was happening there. And I think that there is a similar amount of energy. This is a young population. I think average age in Africa is 19, right? It's a
Wow.
young population. So there's a lot of exciting things that are going to start happening, that are already happening and will be happening for the next couple of decades. And so for teachers, for young teachers who are interested in being a part of kind of the movement, what I call Africa Arise, it's happening and it's going to be super exciting. And so I strongly encourage people, if they don't have international schools in Africa as part of their plan, if they haven't thought of it, try it out. It's really quite special.
I love it. Agreed. Wholeheartedly. Having lived in a couple of places in Africa,
Yeah.
it's just very up and coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got so much knowledge, even though you pretend you know nothing. But wondering if people are interested in following you on social media, maybe, or if there's any way they could reach out to learn more about living and teaching in Africa. And maybe you can drop the name of your book and when it's going to be published so we can get some of that information out there. Please share.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard for me in my role as a State Department to do some of this, but I am certainly always available as a resource if people are interested. I know the right people that you should be contacting. And so if that's happy to have people reach out, happy to field emails, although I do travel a lot, so responses might not be quick. But yeah, the books that I have are already out. My latest is on the PYP and professional learning communities. And that's more of an anthology with a lot of authors that know a heck of a lot more about the PYP than I do, but they're all on Amazon. And then
Yeah.
the one that I really value is the book that I wrote on personalization of learning. So personalized learning is kind of the key concept, and how do you actually give students agency. And so my background is professional learning communities. And then, as you know, these groups of teachers that are getting together asking these four critical questions. What do we want students to know, understand, and be able to do? How are we going to know that they know it? What are we going to do if they don't know it? And what are we going to do if they do know it? That's been my life's work. And this book kind of takes that concept of taking these questions that teachers are supposed to ask and give them to students and say, now students are the ones who should be asking, what is it that I want to know, understand, and be able to do? How am I going to show or demonstrate that I know it? What am I going to do if I'm not learning and I'm struggling? And what am I going to do if I already know it? So that book takes that concept of professional learning communities and offers it to students as a learning process tool. Learning how to learn is the single most important objective of schools these days. And so that's kind of what that book is about.
Wicked. I love it. Well, thank you very much for sharing those.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And we really appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to listeners taking a look at the possibility of going abroad, you just heard from the kind of leadership you might find in your next school if you come overseas. Leaders dedicated to instruction, designing curriculum, all focused on the students. And so that is another theme that runs through a lot of our interviews, the wonderful opportunities to grow and learn. And it starts with our leaders who say that's important, and we're going to do that. So, Dr. Tim, thanks for spending time with us, and thanks for sharing some insights, not only on your experiences in Ethiopia and broader into Africa, but a little bit there on the instructional side of things. So, thank you.
You're more than welcome. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify, and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.